That's
Okay.
welcome to the Ann Arbor Human Rights Commission. Denise,
Okay.
would you call us to order?
Sure. Commissioner Winkler? Here. Commissioner Cowan? Here. Chair Stanbaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Dent? Absent. Commissioner Cass?
Here.
Commissioner Das? Commissioner Gazi Edwins?
Here.
Commissioner Silva?
Here.
Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Radina?
Here.
Vice Chair Garber? Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there anybody for public comment? Do you want to make the announcement?
Let me see. No, not presently.
Okay. Do we have to announce how to do it, or are we, I don't even know if we're streaming.
Okay, I don't see. Hold on.
Well,
Okay.
no comments?
No comments.
Okay. Agenda, are there any changes, any additions, subtractions? Be aware that I'm not sure we're going to be able to get all of this done, but we'll try. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda approved. Are we going to have Lisa Jackson here?
She's here.
She is here, oh, good.
Yes.
Is she going, okay.
Okay. I have her up and on.
So our first topic is unarmed response, and we have invited the chair of the Independent Citizens Police Oversight Commission, Lisa Jackson, to join us.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Welcome.
I didn't mean to startle you, I'm sorry.
At our last meeting, we talked briefly about unarmed response, and we talked about the fact that the IPOC has started working on it, and were we interested in joining? It is one of those topics that is important to both of us, and you all said yes, absolutely, and you asked me to invite Chair Jackson, and here she is. Would you give us an overview? Yeah.
I would be happy to. I was just going to ask you if there's a good place to start. So and you guys shouldn't cut me off and tell me you already know what I'm talking about, and I'm happy to answer questions, whatever you'd like me to do. So I think a good place to start is thinking about, certainly the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission has been interested in unarmed response for a long time, as have other community groups and commissions in Ann Arbor. And we engaged in conversations with several people on council, including the mayor, and council. The mayor drafted and did some research, and there were other sponsors, including your Councilmember Radina, to Resolution 21-0612, and I believe it was passed in April. And that resolution directed the city administrator to investigate whether an unarmed response plan could be feasible in Ann Arbor, and if it wouldn't be feasible, to indicate why it wouldn't. And I want to just read a tiny bit from that. Because what City Council did was they made some acknowledgments about some things that I think we might all be able to kind of get on the same page with. And so one of the clauses in the resolution talks about how even during non-confrontational interactions with the public and the police involving public health, mental health, and human service needs, the presence of a holstered firearm can give rise to feelings of unease and intimidation. And the resolution says, particularly among people from BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. I think many people in those communities may know that to be true, but many people out who haven't had those experiences might be surprised by that. But also it turns out that young people often feel, and other kinds of people who may have had negative experiences with police, that the presence of a firearm does cause some feeling of intimidation. Further, the resolution went on to talk about how about 22% of civilian fatalities involving police arose from police engagements with people who had psychological disorders. And the resolution acknowledged that in some of those cases, police deployment in those situations was unnecessary. And so we have been thinking about unarmed response for a long time and what that might look like in Ann Arbor. I and other commissioners have traveled all over the country by way of Zoom and attended many discussions with groups that are employing unarmed response right now, those who have been doing it for a long time, like the Callouts program in Eugene, Oregon. We were fortunate enough to have engaged in direct conversation with their providers and their directors, as well as other municipalities that may be more similarly situated to us that haven't been doing it quite as long. But one of those examples is San Diego. So in San Diego, they have a system where they have a county sheriff and a county mental health department, and they provide some public safety and some community mental health services. But the city of San Diego decided that they wanted an unarmed response plan of their own. And so they implemented that in January of 2021. And what they have found is that there has been, so there are many reasons to do this, right? And so you could talk about an unarmed response plan from the position of abolition all the way down to fiscal responsibility, that plans like this tend to save money. In Denver, I was actually just talking to somebody yesterday who was talking about how it frees up police to go do other things in which they're more interested. If you're able to have frank conversations with police officers, I don't want to call out any specific municipalities, but there are some in Washtenaw County who would tell you privately that, they didn't sign up to be social workers. They're not interested in responding to calls for service for people who are having psychological disorders. Now, of course, they're going to go where they're called, they're going to do their jobs, but this isn't exactly what they signed up to do. And what we have found overwhelmingly is that police who work in municipalities where these programs have been instituted actually feel a sense of relief and start referring calls to those unarmed response programs. So that could be an argument for doing one. It turns out it's less expensive on the front end to fund a behavioral health specialist, an EMT, something like that, instead of paying police officers to do those jobs. But also there are certainly financial costs on the back end as well, in terms of people not needing some of the very expensive psych ER services or other kinds of services when they can be met right where they are. I think that there maybe is a moral cost to this as well. There's certainly a loss of people in our community who, by way of a mental health issue, get caught up in the criminal legal system and then no longer contribute to our society, to our culture, to our cities, to our municipalities. I think that's a huge cost, not one easily measured, right? And so there are many ways that you can measure the effectiveness of that. But what we see overall in many different cities is that calls for there's a homeless guy sleeping in our doorway and we can't get in our office building go down to police, and they go up to unarmed response plans. We see that people begin to use police services very differently. And we see that police begin to sort of lean on these unarmed response plans to handle some of the calls that they did not necessarily feel particularly well equipped to handle. They are not behavioral health experts by their own admission, of course. And so we've seen lots and lots of models. San Diego is one that kind of mimics ours the closest, in that we certainly have Washtenaw County sheriffs. The city does not have its own public health department, doesn't have its own community mental health, and those things have been relegated to the county. And so San Diego looks like us. You guys are probably really well familiar with Callouts that exists in Eugene, Oregon. And they have decades of data, and they started as an independent little group with one van, and then they expanded and then got kind of supported by the city. And one of the things that's interesting about them, and one of the worries that a lot of people have when they're thinking about unarmed response plans, is that, what happens if there's an emergency and you need the police? And what Callouts shows us, in the year 2021, they called the police 0.06% of the time. So they did not call police even for 1% of their calls. And so when you have people who are trained to do this, and when you have people who have chosen to work in the community in these ways, people are equipped to handle many, many different types of calls, and to do so in an unarmed way. And we, you know, you guys probably know that the governor appointed me to sit on the MCOLS, which is the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. And so we think about training of all police officers across the country, and we know that Ann Arbor, across the state rather, I'm sorry, and we know that Ann Arbor is very fortunate to be able to get lots of training and lots of different kinds of things, right? But we also know that the only training that's required for people to maintain their licenses is firearm training. And we think that there are many more tools that should be used in a public safety plan than just a gun. And so when we think about unarmed response, we can think about that, you know, broadly, and we can think about it in terms of saving money, but we could think about it in terms of maybe bringing the most appropriate tools to the problems that exist. So instead of sending a police officer to somebody who is having a drug overdose, and we have talked to people who were in the throes of an overdose, and or were having a problem such that they were having an adverse reaction to a drug and they were conscious, and having police stand over them until an EMT came was actually quite upsetting to them, quite agitating to them, and that's not an uncommon response. There are many times, you know, and so there are many kinds of problems, and most of those problems are not necessarily solved by somebody showing up with a gun. And so as we've been thinking about unarmed response, we've, you know, been happy to support the city, happy to talk to people about how that could work here. And so we're really happy to support the city administrator's recommendation that about 3.5 million of ARPA funds be dedicated to an unarmed response plan. The Independent Community Police Oversight Commission is lobbying for unarmed response. We're not involved in what that plan might look like, for example, or anything like that, but thinking about public safety broadly is part of our mission, and we have been getting trained and informed, and I could talk about so many different plans across the country that do this already, and I was able to host one with Public Health Awakened, Michigan's branch of Public Health Awakened, where we were able to bring in providers from 4 different states who had unarmed mental health programs. And one of the striking things that they said was that there was no municipality that regretted doing this. There was no place where they thought, oh, we shouldn't have tried this. And so the last question that we asked was, what would you recommend for a city like Ann Arbor that's thinking about doing this? And they were like, do it. Just get started. Start collecting data. Start looking at program efficacy. Start looking at how calls are changing for police, what kinds of people you might be serving who are underserved. We know that there are people in the Ann Arbor community who are very reluctant to call the police, no matter what is happening to them. And I was having a conversation with a council member who was really surprised by that. And I was thinking, you know, I'm not surprised by that at all, but it is kind of surprising, I think, to people. You think of the police as people who will come and help you, but there are lots of people who worry that the police will actually bring more trouble with them. And there was a peer-reviewed paper that was recently published. It showed that 51% of upper middle class African Americans would rather be robbed than call the police. And so when I think about that, when I think about my kids, when I think about those kinds of things, I might weigh, you know, the cost-benefit analysis of a policeman coming. Will they understand that I'm not the perpetrator, that maybe I'm the person who needs help, or where they assume that, you know, since I'm African American, I'm the person who's causing the problem. And so another part of unarmed response is there is a segment of this community that's not being served by the police as well, and they deserve to have public safety too. So I think there's lots of ways we can think about it, but I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I'm going to send you guys an article that I really love. It's from Albany's Law School, and it summarizes unarmed response plans all across the country, and it talks about things like legislation, which of course is, you know, relevant for our city council members, but it talks about how clients get connected to other services in other cases. And Ann Arbor is a place where we do have lots of resources and we can connect people to services. It also talks about dispatch, which is a question that's been under debate in the community, and whether an unarmed response plan should have its own number or whether it should be dispatched through 911, or whether it should be dispatched through an existing number like 311 or something like that. And a lot of people will make the case, and City Administrator Mahoney made this case on February 16th, that if you don't want the police involved, if you don't want surveillance of what's going on with these calls to an unarmed response plan, you can't involve the police. And I think there are some people who would worry that, like kids, a friend is overdosing, they don't want to call the police because they don't want to get in trouble, but, they might be willing to call an unarmed response plan because law enforcement is not tied to that, right? So it's the difference between a kid getting help and not getting help, for example. But there are other people who might worry about something going on in their house and, is CPS going to be involved, or is my name or my address going to go on a list? And we could talk about some instances where it looks as if some surveillance begins to happen after a 911 call or something like that. And so there are people who aren't going to utilize that service who would benefit from something like that. And probably a separate number is most useful. That would not preclude people from calling 911 and saying they want to be routed to an unarmed response. That would be fine. It doesn't preclude police from referring people to an unarmed response phone number, and it wouldn't preclude, in the rare event, which we hope would mimic, Callouts number of 1% of the time, an unarmed team calling the police. And so when we talk about not involving law enforcement, it doesn't mean that those services would be completely walled off from each other. What it really means is that if you call an unarmed response line, you should expect no law enforcement to arrive at your door. Whether we like it or not, that service doesn't exist in Washtenaw County right now. There isn't a way to reliably call a number for help and understand that no law enforcement will also be deployed. The community mental health that we have right now has what's called a co-response, and they often deploy with a law enforcement person. And so that's gonna, eliminate some kinds of people in some situations from utilizing those services. So, I'll send this to Denise, and she can send it to all of you guys, because it's just a really thorough summary from Albany's Law School about points of access, and kind of gets in the weeds in a way you guys do not want me to do now, about different unarmed response plans. But it's a really good place. It talks about money. It talks about how police spending changes, things like that. And so it can answer lots of those nitty-gritty questions you might have about unarmed response too.
Great. The people have questions.
Shoot.
How are you, Dr.
That is
Jackson?
not appropriate. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm curious to hear very pointedly how the Human Rights Commission can aid in this effort to have this pilot implemented. I personally wholly support seeing this in Ann Arbor and our wider county, but I'm curious to hear again how we as a body can assist you in this.
You know what we did on ICPOC? So we were actually named in the resolution that council put forward and passed in April, and it suggests that as a city administrator was developing a plan, that this be done in collaboration with our commission. But what we decided to do at our last meeting was to, actually one of the commissioners made me read the whole thing, so I read it. It's not terribly long, but and we decided to make a statement that we wholly supported this plan, just so we're clear and everybody's clear on the record that the Independent Community Police Oversight Commission endorses, having an unarmed response plan. Certainly you guys can do that, or you can write a statement that says you support that in our community. We think about it from the perspective of public safety. I'm sure you guys might think about it from the perspective of civil rights, and in addition to, some of the public safety concerns that we have. So one thing you could certainly do is, send a letter to council to say that you support this, or draft a resolution, a brief one that says that you support unarmed response in this community as well. The city administrator's report was released last Monday, so that's the 7th, that says what the allocation might be. On the 21st, council will vote and they will distribute the ARPA funds. And certainly you all can lobby and say that you'd like an unarmed response plan to be funded at the level at which the city administrator suggested and not be cut in half or something like that. And I think, and so moving forward, I mean, you all have a pretty prominent voice. You're one of the oldest, most active commissions in saying that this is something that, protects the civil rights of people in Ann Arbor, or something in which you all have an interest as well. Obviously, lots of our missions overlap, but showing your support in that way is certainly really, really useful, I think, and powerful.
Other questions? Linda?
Hi, Lisa. It's Linda Winkler. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Linda?
Good. I think I heard you say that you see ICPOC's job as advocating, but not necessarily getting in the weeds about what the program should look like. But I also hear that you have a wealth of knowledge now, probably more than people on the city staff do. So I'm hoping that you will be collaborating directly with the people who will make the decisions. Is that likely or no?
We're happy to. We're absolutely happy to. And I will tell, and I'm sure Travis and Elizabeth can attest to this. There are so many times I'm like, oh my God, you guys, I'm going to a seminar on Unarmed Response. Counsel, come with me. It's on Zoom. Or here's this great article I read. So I'm bombarding them probably more than they would like with articles and things like that. And I include the city administrator and assistant city administrator in those emails as well. And so I try to help them. I think we expected as a commission to help inform an unarmed response plan starting in April. And what happened, unfortunately, was a series of events in the city that none of us foresaw or had any control over, with city administrator leaving and other people getting busy with other things, and it kind of fell through the cracks. And so it wasn't until December that there was any kind of communication between our commission and the city administrator's office. And so we felt really badly about that. We felt like we'd been banging our head against the wall to say, hey, we'd like to help with this. We'd like to make suggestions. We'd like to talk about what we know. We actually had an agreement with Tom Crawford shortly before he left to say, well, every other week we should meet and share with you what we know so that you can start to incorporate this into your plan. And just those things never materialized. And so it wasn't really clear to us if our expertise was not wanted, if people just didn't have time for it or whatever. We're certainly, and I still tried to do that anyway, even though I'm sure they thought I was being obnoxious by constantly sending them things and telling them they should go to Zoom meetings. We're certainly happy to pass on that information. In fact, the article that I shared with you guys, I just shared with the city administrator and the assistant city administrator about 3 or 4 weeks ago, because I think it'd be useful for them as well. So we are happy to do so. It's just that we know that if an unarmed response plan gets passed and it becomes separate from police, then it's kind of out of our purview. We're happy to contribute to to talk about what we know and what we've seen and how something might work. But I was just being super clear that we know we would have no jurisdiction over anything like that.
I have a question. Have you run into any situations in any of the places that you've seen this implemented where the mental health people are too afraid to go, are hurt, I don't know, would have needed a policeman, felt they needed it?
What's interesting is there are social work programs, for example, that specialize in community social work. And so I think there's a little bit of a selection bias, right? If you sign up to do this work, you are not the kind of person who is necessarily afraid to go out in the community and work with people where they are. And so I have met so many people, from program directors to people providing care on the ground, who were not afraid to do this work. And what I think happens is people who are afraid to do this work just don't engage in it. They choose to work in an office, for example, or they choose to do something else. But what we've seen in almost every community, there are some people who are really interested in working directly with people impacted on the ground. And so there's a little bit of a selection bias in that those are the kinds of people who apply for these kinds of jobs. And people who, feel more scared of clients are those kinds of people who tend to work in offices or would only feel comfortable co-responding with police.
But you haven't
So-
seen social workers being killed, for example?
No.
or- Okay.
Yeah,
'Cause
no,
that-
and even,
that's one of the arguments.
Cahoots
that-
has the most data, and they don't even call the police, but they have never had anybody injured, I think. And Denise, she knows everything we know probably, so then she can send you their website, and they actually address that on their website. They talk about that, and they might talk about that in the Albany paper as well, because that is a concern. And then some people think, well, what happens if there's an emergency, and then you have to call the police later, and there's a delay in getting help? But that doesn't seem to be a thing either. When you have well-trained practitioners, they are prepared for many contingencies. I will say that in many of these cases, the way they provide care is different. And so I have talked with mental health workers here, and they have, stories of things that they've seen that are pretty disturbing, and they feel like they need to call police because this person needs to be committed, and that the police are the only people, community mental health can't do this, who can sort of commit someone to psych ER to do a temporary hold against a person's will. And they feel like that's necessary. But I have talked to practitioners all across the country who actually don't find that to be appropriate, who don't think it's appropriate to commit people against their will. But then that's going to look really different. And in one case, that has meant a person just sitting on the sidewalk with a person for 4 hours until they felt like they had their stuff together and then could move to the next step. That's not what we typically see here because our system isn't set up for that. But I think one of the things that we were really concerned about as we didn't see much action from the city was that in order to think about an unarmed response plan, we have to really expand the way we think about, what safety is and how psychological services are developed. And we have to probably do it in a way that we haven't seen yet in Ann Arbor. And so I felt like, the lack of movement was largely due to a lack of imagination, that we couldn't just ask CMH to do more of what they're doing. What we're thinking about is something different than what we have now. And because you're going to do that with different kinds of people and maybe with a different value system, as I just pointed out, the difference between feeling like it's appropriate to commit people against their will, some people don't agree with that, then we may see something that's very different from what we've seen before. And so we have not seen those kinds of injuries across the country. There are people, though, who, have, minor injuries as they work with people who may be in crisis, but that happens, even when the police are present, so.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions about this?
I just wanted to say thank you. This is Dilip, Lisa. We are incredibly fortunate to have you as a leader in this space, and we really need you. So I'm looking forward to seeing some action in the next year, and it's because of you. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. There's so many people invested in this. I cannot take the credit for that. And I'm so happy at all the things I've learned. I think the more I learn, the more I see that this could be a reality. And the more people we talk to, the more people we see that could benefit from something like this. I got invited to talk to, I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of the organization, but they just had lots of young clients on the call with us, and they were talking about their experiences with having some sort of break and having police respond to the break instead of, behavioral health people. And it was terrifying for some of these kids in some of these cases. And that is not to say the police were doing anything wrong, but their mere presence was really frightening and escalating. And, one of them talks about the trauma just of seeing police in their daily lives now and what that means for them. And so, none of this is a dig at the police, and none of this is a dig at community mental health. I think what we're thinking about is just a different way of doing things. And so we would not think any of those systems would necessarily go away. The research is really clear that communities that have many different kinds of public safety plans are the ones that fare the best. So community mental health can still do their thing. People can still call 911 when they want to. But when you add in an unarmed response plan that can respond to people efficiently and adequately and professionally with some other services that we don't have yet, that seems to be like the best thing.
Any other questions for Lisa?
I have just a quick question. Lisa, hi, how are you?
How are you?
I'm good. So the 3.5 that has been, I think, earmarked for from ARPA for this. Is that sufficient? What does that cover for what time frame? And would you need more?
That's a really interesting question, an astute question, of course, Ms. Cowan. I think, so those would be probably startup funds. And it's not clear exactly the timeline on which they might be dispersed, but probably over a year or two. And there are lots and lots of startup costs with starting such a program. You'd need, office space, you'd need to have dispatchers, you'd need ambulance services or transportation services, you'd need really qualified workers. People need to be paid appropriately, and that's super important that we're doing that. And so my expectation is that this might be something that could get a program started, but it would need to be an annual part of the city's budget. However, if you have 18 months or 2 years of collecting data and you can see where services are being diverted from, say, the police or from other kinds of services to this new program, and that you're saving $2 million here, then certainly, maybe the city can reallocate that money differently. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about. These ARPA funds are, kind of a one-time, really big deal. And they would be enough to set up a program, but almost all across the country, what's happened is programs have started, they've collected data, and they show how useful they are, which takes a while to show, but they show how useful they are, they show how valuable they are to a community, and over time, people begin to use those services more and more, and you can see sort of, the cost savings in that, and so cities can reallocate money in that way. But usually what they found is that they're saving, $4 million in one place and only spending $2 in another. And so usually that tends to be really fiscally responsible too. So I don't think the 3.5 million would be enough to, get a program up and running for forever, but I think it might be enough to get a program up and running long enough to collect some data and show how useful it is to the community.
Any more questions? I see everybody shaking their heads to much of what you're saying. How about we put it on the agenda for next meeting and think about starting with perhaps a resolution to show our support for this, and maybe something else.
We're grateful. Thank you guys for even considering it.
This is very exciting. I think, am I right? Well, we'll talk about it next time, and we'll read your paper. And
Yes.
thank you very much for that, but don't go,
I won't. I'll just mute or whatever until it's time to talk again.
because it'll be soon.
Okay, I'm right here.
Are we okay with that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Then we will go to our next agenda item, which also involves ICPOC, and that is their call for traffic stop data. Now, Lisa, you want to start talking about what you're doing with the traffic stop data that you have now, and why this is necessary, this resolution.
Okay. All right, so you guys may know that the Ann Arbor Police Department has given ICPOC, and I'll talk about what I mean by given in a second, several years of traffic stop data. So 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And we wanted to analyze that data, and we wanted to do it for years, but it literally took years to sort of make this happen. And then once it became clear that we could have this data and use it, we found a research partner in Eastern Michigan University, and the acronym for the group is called SMART. It's the Southeast Michigan Criminal Justice Policy Research Project. I'm really happy I got that right. They're going to analyze the 2017, 2018, and 2019 traffic stop data. And there is a working group of statisticians and criminologists and sociologists and other kinds of researchers. And I certainly participate in that group. And what we're doing is trying to figure out the best analysis to use to examine all the data points that we have. There are like 20,000 traffic stops every year. We're going to analyze 2020, but we're going to do it separately because you guys know that was the COVID year. And so right about in March, police really made some different decisions about stopping people, and that happened a lot less. So it'll be very interesting to look at that and to see were traffic accidents up when they didn't stop people as much, or what other kinds of things changed. But we will analyze that data separately because that's like a unicorn year, right? So, so we partnered with SMART and we applied for a grant. And so the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan gave us a grant that will help pay for this analysis and pay for researchers to do this work. Just so everyone in the public is clear, the data were actually given directly from the police department to the researchers. I had a concern that, you know, if they gave it to me, someone would say I was playing with the data. So we had a nice chain of custody, and it was given directly to the researchers. And they worked with a person who no longer works for the police department, Jeff McDowell, who was like a data analyst. And so there's a lot of interesting data there, and we are, we'll have some community meetings, some town halls. We will likely publish a paper, and we'll talk about what those data tell us. I have no idea what they're going to say yet, because we're just trying to struggle with what's the best way to analyze the data, and the answer is going to be multiple ways. Two things. You guys know that the Michigan State Police recently released a report of traffic stop data for a single year, and it shows that there's some bias, and they used many kinds of analysis. Some of those we might use, some of those we don't necessarily think are the best ways to do it, but like as they did, we will use many different ways to analyze this data, these data points. And we actually are going to have Lieutenant Colonel Crum, who is the second in command at Michigan State Police, come to our next ICPOC meeting. So that's March 22nd, and he's going to talk a little bit about how they feel like making public their traffic stop data, even though it's not pretty, even though it does show bias, actually enhances trust in the community. And so there was some reluctance on the part of the city attorney's office and the police to let us do this. And so MSP is going to come and talk about how they think it's beneficial. You guys also probably know that in 2017, I think there was a group, a Dolan Consulting Group, who published a report on traffic stop data in Ann Arbor that said not only were African Americans not disadvantaged, but white men were disproportionately targeted by the police. And we were surprised by that conclusion. We have looked at, as your chairperson knows, that report with a fine-tooth comb. We actually see math errors in the report itself, which is fascinating, not even looking at their raw data. But one of the years that we have is the year that they analyzed as well. And so we will do a comparison, and we will be really frank and upfront about how we're looking at these data and whether we see what they see. What we are talking about now in terms of traffic transparency and hoping to collaborate with you all on and the Transportation Commission on is making sure that the Ann Arbor Police Department releases traffic stop data every year. That those data are available to the public. So I had to fight really hard in about 8 months to be able to use these data without a non-disclosure agreement. And so the police were have been handed over as long as we never told anybody what we found. And that seemed wholly inappropriate. The data are anonymized. There are no drivers' names in this data, no identifying information. And so why shouldn't we talk about it? And my argument was that these data belong to the people who got stopped. They don't belong to the city. They don't belong to the police department. They belong just as much, if not more, to all the people who got ticketed or warned or whatever their interaction was. Those kinds of things are all in the data. And so what we're really asking for is for the police to continue doing what they did, for them to make these data available every year to our commission and your commission and the Transportation Commission, and for them to be public. There's a lot of value in having, open source police data. We sit at the foot of the University of Michigan with huge, ability to analyze data, and lots of grad students and lots of the Institute for Social Research is right here. And so lots of people who might be interested in doing that. We actually have an expert in town who came from Stanford and published some really interesting papers on the tone of police officers and was able to do that with Stanford's sort of open policing data project. And so there are so many things that could be beneficial to this community if these data were public. And so there has been a little bit of conflation over, well, if the police get a dashboard, they can do it. And that is actually irrelevant to this process. Traffic stop data are what we're focusing on now because they are already input into a data management system that's easily accessible. A few clicks, you can download an Excel file and send it over, which is what happened, in this process. And so we are just asking the police department to do that continually. So every year to release that data and for that to be public. Whether they have a dashboard or not, our commissions would certainly be in possession of the data and could share it with whomever. We can have it on our website, you guys can post it on yours, and people can just access the data sets. But more than that, we can collaborate and we can talk about what we find, and we can talk about whether things are changing. Do the data in 2017 look different than 2021, for example? What happened in 2020 when there were fewer traffic stops? And so these are all really interesting questions, but not just intellectual questions. They're questions that make a difference to people who live in this community. And so it's a pretty simple resolution. We're just asking a council to create an ordinance that would have the Ann Arbor Police Department release this data every year and allow it to be made public. And they, would likely want to share it on their website as well, but we will do that irrespective of whether they're able to do that or not. And so that's really, basically what we're asking for. And we know that there are civil rights questions in this as well. We know there are transportation safety issues in this as well, which is why the Transportation Commission is interested. And so, we're just interested in more transparency. And that's certainly one of the missions of our Oversight Commission, is trying to make the police department more transparent, more understandable. And we really do think that those steps towards transparency are the big picture way to engender more trust from the community. One of our liaisons criticizes me a lot because he feels that I'm too critical of the police and I'm always asking too much of them. But I really think that as we nudge them to be more transparent, that does increase trust. And though it's unpleasant for them, it's uncomfortable for them, and not because they're doing anything wrong, just because it's not used to what they're doing, and they're not used to having anybody bug them all the time about things like this. But when we take those steps, little by little by little, it does enhance the trust that people have, and they feel like, like the Michigan State Police, they were willing to show this even though it wasn't really flattering. And so that's what we're asking for. We hope you join us in that effort. And we hope that the Transportation Commission does as well. Our meeting is later than yours, so we won't get to vote on it until March 22nd, but we have a transparency resolution as well, and we'll ask Council to pass an ordinance. Many cities have done this. Philadelphia was our inspiration, but there are other cities in Michigan that are working on this now as well. So we hope that it will be just a little snowball and, snowball into something bigger.
Well, now, you all have a copy of the resolution that we're going to talk about today, but before we talk about that, you have any questions for Lisa about this? No? Then.
There you go, everything.
Well, we would like to be one of the people who are in support of the data collection and data analysis, so we're very excited about this. Have you all had a chance to look at this resolution? First of all, can we have a motion to pass it? And then we discuss it afterwards,
yeah.
Remember? It always seems weird to me.
Well, are we moving to pass it, or are we moving, yeah, okay.
No, we're just moving, we're going to the discussion.
Okay, so I move that we discuss and then possibly pass it. Okay.
Still doesn't make sense to me.
No.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. Aiden.
A couple of quick call-outs. Firstly, thank you to Dr. Jackson for really spearheading this effort, and a lot of the research behind it is greatly appreciated. This specific resolution mirrors that of Dr. Jackson's work on ICPOC, as well as our Transportation Committee Commission here in town. And furthermore, this was wholly a collaboration between all three commissions, I would say. From the Human Rights Commission, Kita, myself, and Aisha
Yes.
were co-authors of this, and I feel that from this collaboration, we're really able to put something together special. Some callouts that I have, very specifically, I love how pointed the data points that we're requesting are. And I feel like that is the strongest part of this resolution, and something I wanted to call out, because I think, you know, in the earliest drafts of this language, super vague, candidly. And so Kita, you were a heavy hand in that, so I wanted to specifically point that out. But from this, I think that this is so solid. I think that this, in my brief tenure in the Human Rights Commission, is one of the, you know, most commendable things that we have worked on. And so I'm very eager to support this resolution. And if I can be helpful in any way, fielding any questions, please feel welcome to ask now.
Leslie, I also, excuse me, want to jump in. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Jackson, for helping us with this. And one of the things that you kept reiterating is how important it is for the Transportation Commission, the Human Rights Commission's resolution to all have the same resolved clauses. So while I was writing this, I made sure that we all mirrored each other. And it mirrors what ICPOC is going to be putting forward, correct? And the last clause is asking that a report is shared with the three commissions by AAPD annually, correct?
Yes.
So we would also get that data. And I think that's immensely important.
Yes.
Because then we would be, you know, on an ongoing basis, kind of involved in this process.
Absolutely. And anybody could go to any of our commissions and find the exact same thing. It would be so easy,
Yeah.
so amazingly transparent, no matter how you thought about it. If you were thinking about human rights, if you were thinking about transportation information, traffic safety information, if you were thinking about police oversight, you could go to any of our commissions and download the same data set.
Yep.
Yes, being able also to download the data set, the raw data is also important. And that is also in here. Other thoughts? Linda?
I did have one question. The very first resolve clause, I wonder if it should say, be made accessible to the public for analysis.
The second resolve clause, right.
The second resolve
Yeah.
clause, yeah.
I think that was left out, and I think it should be. I agree
It
with
doesn't
that.
actually say, it just says, be
We
made
have
accessible.
We have at the end of ours, I don't know, like one of the last data points in the first resolve clause is notwithstanding any other law, the data reported should be available to the public.
Oh,
I think
okay.
you guys
I
might
did
have
not
that too.
see that, okay.
Is it?
I
is
don't
it
think we
anywhere?
have the word
It's
available
there
to
and I
the
missed
public,
it.
so I'm going to put it in.
Okay.
It may have
Okay.
gotten cut off.
Yeah,
I think it
Okay.
accidentally got cut
I
off.
think it might have.
And because I think that's kind of the key to the whole
Yes.
thing. We've asked for all of this
Exactly.
stuff, and we also want it available to the public.
Right, so,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would still add it, but to that second resolve clause, but it's not crucial, because I didn't notice it in the first one.
Oh, okay. Well,
And,
I'll add it
you know,
anyway.
this has been a real collaboration. We have learned some things from your commission. We have learned some things from the Transportation Commission, and those things are reflected in ours. And so as you all add and change yours, it gives us the opportunity to do that as well. We'll be the last ones, actually.
You'll be all the best.
And so, you know, we are informed by what you guys do as well. And so this wasn't, you know, it was a true collaboration.
Yes. Any other comments, questions before we vote on this? Okay, then are we ready to vote?
I make a motion that we vote on this.
That's a good idea.
I second.
All in favor of
Aye.
approving this?
Aye.
I think procedurally, though, you already had a motion on the floor. You either have to vote it up or down before you can introduce a new motion.
Oh,
Well, yes, probably. Okay. But the motion said, what was your motion?
Pam's right. I mean, we moved to pass it, and I guess we'll just pass
I
it.
think we
as-
moved to talk about it.
The question is, are we passing it as is or as amended? I'm fine either way. I suggested that amendment, but it's not necessary. So we can
I
pass
would
it
like
as
the
is.
amendment, just because I want to make sure that public is,
I don't understand, because it is listed in the last bullet point on the
Yeah,
first resolve.
Under the first resolution.
Okay, that's fine then.
oh, okay.
That's
Maybe
fine.
that's what.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
So my motion was
to pass
to
it.
pass this resolution as is.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay. We're done. Thank you so much for your
Thank
presence
you,
here,
Lisa.
for your presentations.
It really is.
We're now going to go to more boring but important business, internal
That's right,
business.
very important. Well, I will say good night and thank you all. This is so exciting and we value the collaboration with you. We expect to collaborate some more on some other endeavors and I think this really benefits the entire community. It's not a cliche to say that together we are stronger and there are so many different kinds of talents on our different commissions, and to pool those together has made something like this that could have taken months and months to do has been pretty expeditious. And so thank you all so much for everything that you've contributed to this and the way that you've informed us as well.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you. Take care.
Very exciting. Bye now.
Bye.
Okay. The next thing on our agenda has to do with all these little changes to the non-discrimination ordinance. And Linda, would you mind talking about how this came about?
Well, it's been over time, and I think we probably don't need to go over all of them again. We're changing where ethnicity falls in the order to make it alphabetical. We're changing the definition of gender expression, gender identity.
Have
I think
people
that was
seen,
all
I
to-
sent out
Yeah, I have
and the
that.
things that were in track changes were the changes.
Right. We're changing them to mirror the definitions in the conversion therapy prohibition ordinance, because the definitions we came up in that ordinance are really better than these. So there's that. We got rid of the 180-day
we already
requirement
voted
for
on.
filing a complaint.
Remember?
Thanks to
Yep.
Kita. And then the only thing we have, and we're adding protection for religious head coverings.
Right.
Then the only thing we haven't discussed, when we were getting rid of the 180 calendar day section, we were looking at it and we thought the second part of 9159, which says that a complaint must include the name, address, phone number, and all these details, and it says must. We thought, given the way we operate, we don't really want to create any barriers to people filing complaints. So Margie replaced that language with other language which just says the complaint may be submitted in person, by telephone, by mail, or electronically, period, and just got rid of all of section 2. That's really the only change that we haven't discussed.
That change made it easier for people to not necessarily have to fill out our form, especially if they don't have a computer or they can't, literacy or whatever reason is. Just made it easier
Right.
for us to, and usually ordinances don't have that much, some of this process, it changes with technology and our capabilities. So it hasn't.
Can I ask a question? Linda, did I talk with you about government-issued ID cards?
With me,
No? Because that's a change I would like to discuss and have adopted.
well,
That there are 3 different types of government-issued ID in the U.S. now. One's the county, Washington County, one's the state, and one's obviously federal documents. huge 25% of folks with low income now use the county ID because they're eligible for it. Could we, I think, look into adding that to the NDO?
I don't know that
I mean,
it
it's-
goes in the non-discrimination ordinance.
I can't hear you.
I don't know how it goes well, it doesn't go in with what we're talking about now, let's put it that way.
No, I know. I was just not sure if I'd spoken to Linda about
Okay.
that issue.
I know,
but-
I think it's worth discussing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My
and-
hesitancy with holding off longer is that some of these changes, like the 180-day change, that's been sitting here for a long time, and we now have at least 4 different changes, so it feels like we should let Margie go ahead, put it before council, and then we can start working on other things that we want to do. We have some other ideas, and what you're proposing now might be one of them, but it sounds like that might take a little work, so I'd be hesitant to hold off on making these changes. Just because we're sending these now doesn't mean we can't send others in the future.
Well, I was thinking that we would start a work group to look at it, and then we could get as far as we got, and then when it was when we have a natural opportunity to,
Sure.
yeah, to study it and vote on
Sure,
it, we could.
sure.
Sure.
Denise has her hand up.
Who does?
Denise.
Oh,
Wanted to let you know that Margie is here.
oh, thank you.
Oh,
I don't think do we have questions for Margie about this? I don't think so.
no, I don't think so. Thanks for your help, Margie, on all of this.
Happy to help. I know it's
Okay.
nice to see you guys on Monday.
What was that? So are these changes all okay with everybody?
Can we vote on these changes? Are we ready?
Yeah.
I move that we adopt the ordinance as
Second.
proposed changes.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Accepted.
Just a
Thank
quick
you.
comment, Leslie.
Yes?
Because we have, from the time we revised this ordinance to present, we have and continue to come up with subject matter that we think will need to be added to.
Yeah.
Is it likely that we may want to just on an annual basis, perhaps, introduce those changes so that it's an evolving document as opposed to one that's kind of set in stone? And then just put that on the agenda so that, to entertain or speak to Kita's request, so that we are having the most current and accurate document that serves the public. So I'm just recommending that we do that, at least on an annual basis, but it can be more frequent if necessary.
Thank you. I think we'll do that. I don't think we have to vote on it. But that's actually what Margie did, and that was very helpful.
I think that's really a great idea. Can we vote on adopting that policy or having that
Well-
policy written?
We've got some things that we want to get done when we want to get done, and then Margie decides, I guess.
I couldn't hear you.
We have, I don't know, I need this too, don't I? We have some things that need to be done at a certain time also, but yes, I suppose we could vote on having what do you call it, a parking lot or something for issues.
And then annually, we would,
Okay.
develop those?
Do you want to,
Something you probably have to vote on. I think you can implement it as a policy of the body.
yeah.
Pam, do you want to make the motion?
I move that we implement a policy where we are with our NDO, have it become a working document that evolves with current events that we feel are important that need to be added to the ordinance, and have that be done at least on an annual basis.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, we can move to the minutes then of the last meeting, February meeting. Does anybody have changes that they would like to make, or questions or comments about the minutes for the February meeting?
Do we have an update on the facial recognition yet, Aiden and others who were involved in that?
I can't hear you.
Do we have an update on the facial recognition meeting that was going to be scheduled with Ariane Slay?
Right now, we're just going to do the minutes of
Right.
last time.
You
and then-
asked if there were questions or comments about the minutes,
Oh,
so that's in the
but that-
minutes.
But that's a question that's coming up after the minutes.
I'm sorry?
When we talk about facial
Okay.
recognition again. Right now, I think we should just talk about the minutes.
I motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are accepted. Now, we should go to City Council. Travis and Elizabeth, are there things we ought to know about, or things you'd like to tell us about what's going on in the city that you think are of a special interest to us?
Well, I think one of the things is that, so the recommendation that you just passed will still have to come to City Council, and so that is something that I think we can bring to a future meeting. I can briefly, this is a little out of order at this point, I did also have a follow-up with Attorney Slay, and I'm hoping to have a draft here in the next couple of weeks. At least that's what I've asked for in terms of a timeline on facial recognition. This has been, I think, a little bit slower than the working group would have liked, but we are hoping to have a draft that the working group can then regroup on and discuss. But we provided feedback on the initial draft, and now we're kind of waiting for that updated version. Other council things recently?
When that draft comes out, could we see it?
Well, yeah, so what would likely happen is our working group would come together and discuss it again, and then if we're finally good with it, we'll bring it back. I think the process we discussed was bringing it back to both this body and to ICPOC, because the working group is 2 members of each of those.
Thank you, that would be
Yep.
great. Does that answer your question, Pam?
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else going on with City Council that we should know about? No? Or in facial recognition, any more comments about that?
Travis said it beautifully.
Good, move on. Community outreach, Aisha.
For community outreach, I know that we were talking about flyers, that we wanted to know your rights flyers. There has not been much movement on that yet. I hope that we can have another working group meeting and address it before the next meeting. Are there any other, I don't know if, Diana, if you want to jump in, or?
So, sort of. I'm kind of next. So I do have a meeting on Monday with Neutral Zone. So we will have to come up with something to give them or work with them. And so our community outreach group will have to meet. So I will have to kind of nudge our group a little more this month. The other thing is, I did get some more information from Ann Arbor Public Schools, and so they're telling me that, like for a presentation there, that should be, probably 20 minutes, like a 20-minute informational session. So again, for outreach, I now have a time frame, and so when you're thinking about what information we're going to give and how long it should be, again, we're narrowing it down here, people. So I guess more to come after I talk to Neutral Zone on Monday. But I do think we definitely have to meet this month and kind of put pen to paper and figure out what we're going to say and do. And I do understand that we're talking about kind of two different things because we have different target audiences. Neutral Zone and the Ann Arbor Public Schools are youth. And then we've also, as a group, we've talked about, the public in general and flyers and having those in multiple languages and that sort of thing. And I think that once we come up with language and information once, I think it'll be easy to multiply that and do it in different languages. Not that I'm going to do that because I only know one language unless you count slang, in which case I know a couple.
I'm very interested in finding out what people want to know, what they want to hear. And I'm also interested in, we also talked a little bit when we talked about, when we had a meeting with Margie about things in the non-discrimination ordinance, and we talked about posting also, because there was a possibility that we could put in the ordinance that you had to post. And then we decided we're not there yet. We're not ready to do anything like that yet. But we'd like to assess the need, because clearly I don't think people know about their rights, and I think they should.
Yeah.
I think this is also something that makes Ann Arbor special, and that we should publicize it.
Yeah. Then also, we discussed coming up with just a standing kind of protocol or process of announcing on TV prior to each meeting who we are, how you make a complaint, what kind of complaints we take. I think that's still worthwhile. I drafted a basic script, but I think that's something that should be prioritized on the outreach committee's agenda.
Okay.
Would that be something, Aisha, that you're going to be considering like for doing on CTN?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we talked about that. I think you
Yeah.
also, yeah. So I'll reach out to you too.
Okay.
We can maybe try to get some movement on it.
Okay. So the outreach committee is dealing with it.
Yep.
Excellent. Anything else about outreach? I've got Fair Chance Housing on here. I don't know that there's any updates. I don't know if I speak now, if you want me to do anything about Fair Chance Housing. I don't really know what's on there. Complaints. This was the first quarter. We were supposed to have Keita and Aiden involved. We have very few, right now we have nothing. We've got a possible coming up, and I don't know of anything.
Well,
They just come, and they come unevenly.
I know, but you skipped over the one that we had that
That's
was
true.
then withdrawn.
Yes, we did have one, and it was withdrawn.
So I worked on one up until
Yes,
the
that's
point when
right.
it was
That's
withdrawn, right?
That's right.
And that's something that I think should be added to the list of data that we collect. It just dawned
Oh, it
on
will
me
be.
as I spoke just
Absolutely.
now.
This was, without saying anything.
Well, no, I don't want to go into that. I was just saying what seemed relevant that we could carry forward.
Right.
Is an expansion of resolutions of the different complaints that reach us. How were they resolved?
Yeah, I think one of the
Like-
points of keeping this database is that it can capture information from complaints that are filed, even if they're withdrawn, that, particularly the one you're talking about, could be very relevant if a subsequent complaint were filed by
Yes.
Right.
someone
Very
related to the same person. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Right.
Because I think there's some lessons that we can learn about a process.
Yes, and about the quality of complaints. One of the things we can learn is that people who have been discriminated against are very sensitive and hurt by it, and sometimes they can't deal with it when we're ready to deal with it. So, and that's,
Yeah, and I think it really just confirmed a lot of what we talked about theoretically about folks that, have
yeah,
been discriminated against, that it can take a lot of time.
that's right.
Right.
So, we welcome them back. We do everything we can to keep in touch and make sure we can make it as right as we can.
And another thing that we should be promoting as part of this outreach initiative is how we changed stipulations of filing a complaint so that it's more trauma-informed. So there's not the 100-day limit from the time someone experiences an incident.
Yes.
That someone can report a complaint even if it happened a long time ago, right?
Right.
Right.
I think that's definitely something I think that we need to make the public aware of.
Yeah. I hope something like that is part of the,
Yeah.
what you talk about. Refining the complaint process, did we do anything about that this time either? Linda?
Yeah, we had a meeting.
Yes.
I think it was between last meeting and this meeting. I could be wrong about that. And we've started working with Denise, and we will be meeting with Nick from IT to better refine the data that we are keeping and to make sure, the data that Denise is keeping on each complaint in SharePoint, some of those categories will expand. And we haven't yet created a SharePoint equivalent for the Fair Chance Access to Housing ordinance that currently exists for the non-discrimination ordinance. So we're working on all of that. I also took the procedures we had for the complaint process and just adapted it so there's basically a checklist for Denise, a checklist for the commissioners, so that maybe it's a little more user-friendly than it was, but we're still working on that as a group, and when it's done, we'll distribute it.
Thank you. I think we're actually moving a lot closer to what's going to be a very good complaint acceptance process. But it's taken a lot of time, but it's a hard thing to do. And trespass, I just want you to know that the trespass information we have now sent the memo to the police chief and to the city attorney's office and to the city administrator. And we will be finally, I think, talking to them about the policy and how we think it should be changed so that it's more fair and more clear to the people who've been trespassed or charged with trespass. Trespass is the kind of it's so broad that a lot of people look at it as a way to control people unfairly, because you don't have to have any clear-cut reasons for trespassing, except that the proprietor or the owner of the property doesn't want you there. And so it's a very touchy thing, and we've had some problems with people who have been trespassed and don't understand why, don't think it was done fairly, et cetera. So we have been looking for quite a while at trespass and how it could be changed. Hopefully we'll make a difference. Pam, any other thing about trespass that you want to say?
No, we're just waiting on, I know we've sent the memo, we're waiting on a response, and
We're waiting
ideally
for a
setting up the
response.
next meeting. I think the memo, though, clarifies a lot of the ambiguities that were in place or that came to our attention. So that's progress from our last meeting, and I'm
Yes.
happy to see that. Anxious to have that next meeting so that we can ideally move forward to implementation.
Yes, that would really feel like progress. Do we have any new business? Any commissioner communications? Is that meetings you think we'd be interested in? Any announcements? Then I guess we entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second?
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.